season when we're new believers, our seasons of our faith, where we get to see all the stuff easily. We get to see the provision. We get to see all the ways God's going to answer the prayer. But then we walk into the season where we instantly don't have to see, but we have to believe. You know what I mean? We don't know how he's going to work it out. We have to stand in faith that he is going to work it out. We don't know how we're going to get through it, but we have to choose to believe that we will. And that is the place of the wilderness. Now, here's what's interesting. Israel could have moved from that point to the promised land in 11 days. Okay? They could have walked through this season of the test for 11 days till they got to their land. Instead, can someone tell me how long they chose to stay there? 40 years. Now, I believe as men and women of God, I believe we have that same choice. It is not, we're never going to be free of the test. We're never going to be free of those moments that we have to question, okay, where's the money going to come from? How am I going to do this? How's my child? We're never going to be free of the questions, but we are going to have a choice whether or not we stay stuck in a wilderness. Whether or not we allow the circumstances that happen to us to destroy our faith or to make us more faithful. And so what I want you to see is just as Israel walked through this, and they really, that one generation of Israelites, they did not go through. They remained stuck. But Joshua and Caleb went in and took the land, and their children went in and took the land. But that first generation stayed stuck in the wilderness because of unbelief. Because of unbelief. But what I want you to know, and here's your next point on your notes. A wilderness season is the expectation, not the exception for a believer. A wilderness season is the expectation, not the exception for the believer. I tell you that because here's the thing. I wish someone would have told me that. I had been a Christian for about 5 years when I went through this. And all I had been told up to that point is, God has an amazing plan for your life. There is an abundant life when you follow Jesus. You will have blessings. And let me just stand and confess, all of those things are true. All of those things are true. I live in the abundance. I live in the blessings. I experience God's goodness on a daily basis. But the reality that our faith will be tested, the reality that the enemy will come after us, the reality that Jesus said, in this world you will have troubles, okay? Those realities, I did not listen to them when they were taught, or I just was not taught that because I was not prepared. I was blindsided for the intensity of the attack on my faith, for the intensity of the enemy's agenda. I was not prepared for it. And so I, just being a speaker of truth and a lover of women, have to say to you, yes, this is the expectation, that you're going to walk through a season where your faith is tested. This is not an exception. I put some examples here, and we're going to go through some of these stories in the next few weeks. I'm not going to teach them all now. Elijah saw God do miraculous things. He saw God completely defeat his enemies, and the next day, the Bible tells us he ran into the wilderness and wanted to die. Okay? Paul knocked off his horse, an amazing display of God's glory, a revelation of who Jesus is, a revelation that changed his life. And then for 14 years, God put Paul on the bench in the wilderness where he would be learning and be taught. He was not using his spiritual gifts. He was not leading the church. For 14 years, he was invisible. He was unknown. But God was working on him in the wilderness. David David, we love the story of David. We love the David that kills Goliath. We love that he was the shepherd boy after God's own heart. But what we don't understand is from the time David was anointed as king until the time he became king, there was 18 years of him hiding in a cave in a wilderness from a madman who was trying to kill him. And then Jesus he begins his ministry and has this amazing moment where he's baptized and the heavens literally open and say, "You are my beloved son." And the dove of the Spirit rests on him. He is anointed by God, proclaimed as the Son of God. And the very next verse said he was driven into the wilderness where he was tempted by the enemy. So what I'm trying to convey is this is not a unique experience to one believer. This is not just through what some Christians go through. That all of us will walk through a time when our faith is tested. Turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 1. Peter is writing this to the church that has, the church began to grow mightily, and I love that Pastor Matt is talking about the book of Acts right now in church. The church began to grow rapidly and mightily and have this amazing increase, and the power of the Holy Spirit was resting on the disciples, and they were seeing the same signs and wonders that Jesus did, they were doing, and the lame were walking, the people were being healed, and the gospel was spreading like wildfire throughout Jerusalem. And then, in the midst of this pinnacle of God's power, persecution hit and spread the church everywhere. And the persecution hit so powerfully that Christians were having to hide. They were losing their possessions. Just imagine today in Texas if they said, "You're a Christian, we have a right to take your home." This is what's happening to these people. Being drug out in the streets and beaten because of the name of Christ, okay? That's immediately what began to happen to these people. And so Peter's writing this letter to the church that because they have chosen Christ, they are now beginning to go through the fire, okay? They're going through a wilderness. And he says these words that we probably know but haven't thought about the context to. In verse 6, he says, "In this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, that the proof of your faith," will you say proof? "Being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor in the revelation of Jesus Christ. And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls." So Peter writes to the church and says, yes, the enemy has come after us, but keep standing firm. Keep holding fast to what you believe, because the outcome of your faith is the salvation of your souls. And he uses an interesting word in there. He uses the word proof. Now, I just want to make some real clear statements here so no one gets confused. I believe that once a person is born again and has salvation, that nothing in the world can change your status as a child of God. I do want to make this small caveat. Many people can grow up in a religious setting. They can grow up in the church and around other Christians, and they can know the lingo, they can know the drill, they can know what time the services are, and they can be serving in ministries and not have been born again, okay? There's a huge difference. I mean, Becky and I share similar testimonies, raised in church but did not have a relationship with God. And so the word that Peter uses here is proof. He said that you're going to be tested so that genuine faith can be shown. So the people who go through the fire and they truly aren't born again and they truly don't have a relationship with God, what are they going to do when the heat gets turned on, they're like, they're bailing on Jesus, right? But the one who perseveres and stays, even when the enemy comes after them, that is proof, not to God, but to me and to you, that you have salvation faith, right? For instance, now that my life revolves around nursing a child, I have discovered the Today Show again. Haven't watched it since like 1990. But just recently, they did this thing where they brought these diamonds on. And apparently, one of the diamonds was real, and one of the diamonds was artificial. And they show them on the screen, and you cannot tell at all. I mean, I'm like, that's beautiful, and it has light and color. It's only when they put it to the test could they actually determine which one was the real thing and which one wasn't. And that test involved fire, and that test involved a great, breaking down of the molecules. And so that's what happens to us. When we go through the fire, when we go through the test, it proves to us that our faith is real. It proves to us that we truly have saving faith. And so that's one of the reasons this happens. But something that helped me understand what happens in the wilderness. I remember I was in the midst of it, and I was really, like those moments in your journey with God that you're putting your head on the pillow at night and you're crying your eyes out and you're having to say scripture to yourself just to get your mind calm. Like one of the passages I would repeat over and over to myself was, the nearness of my God is my good. And that's how I would go to bed at night, is just repeating that to myself. And I would wake up and I would have to text people, I need you to pray for me, because, P.S., my job is I was a full-time Bible teacher at a Christian high school. So I had to get up and teach snotty-nosed teenagers to love Jesus when I'm like dying on the inside. So that was super fun. And I'm in full-time seminary and writing a book. So yeah, it was not time for a breakdown, but I was going through it. And so I listened to this sermon by Louis Giglio. And this sermon probably kept me sane and got me walking out of the wilderness. And in this sermon, he was teaching about Job. And he said something about Job that if you ever have those moments that the light goes on and you're like, oh, that's what's happening here. He said something about Job I'm going to share with you in a minute, but I want you to turn there for a second. Now, all of us can probably recount things that we've walked through that are tough. I remember having to apologize to a friend that her mom had just died of leukemia because I was crying so hard about a breakup. I felt stupid. I'm like, this is just a breakup, and you're actually going through something real, But something the Lord taught me is this: pain is pain. And it's hard to quantify pain, because why it's painful is not always explainable to somebody. Why it's so hurtful is not always something you can put in words. But when we look at the life of Job, I think we can all say none of us have lived to this degree, okay? And so we see this story of Job that I just want to encourage someone in this room. Job was highly favored of God, and Job was a righteous man. So if anyone in this room right now has ever heard the lie that said, well, if you were a good Christian, or if your life was free from sin, then you wouldn't be suffering. Well, that is straight up a lie from the pit of hell, because that is not from the Bible. That is not from the Bible. And that's actually some of the things that Job's friends said to him that God rebuked. So suffering is not due to things that we've done. Suffering is suffering. And so Satan took note of Job because God called him highly favored and called him blameless. And so here's what we see. verse 6 of Job chapter 1. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him in his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But," okay, this is Satan speaking, "put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." Okay, I want you to imagine this. I cannot answer theologically all the questions that go on with this conversation. How did Satan get before God? That's not my job here. What I want you to see is this. Satan threw down a gauntlet and said these words: "The only reason Job worships you, God, the only reason he is devoted to you, the only reason that he gives his life to you is because you bribe him." Satan's attack was on the glory, the goodness, and the faithfulness of God. He said, if you remove the blessings from Job's life, then Job will curse you to your face and he will walk away. He basically said the test wasn't about Job. The test was about the goodness of God. And he said, if you take away the wealth, if you take away the marriage, if you take away the kids, if you take away the health, then you know what Job's going to do? He's going to say, "See you later." Ladies, our wilderness seasons, here's what they are, is a war for your worship. A wilderness season is a war for your worship. And when I heard a sermon that taught me that, here's what it did. It gave oxygen to my soul. Because here's what I needed. I needed to know that the same enemy who had the first 25 years of my life, who tried to destroy me with sexual sin, who tried to kill me with alcohol, who tried to kill me with self-hatred, who had me in bondage, what I needed to know was I was in the fight for my life. And that just because Jesus had redeemed me, and just because Jesus had rescued me, and I was in love with Jesus, that didn't mean the enemy was done with me. He had set his sights on me, and there was a war going down in the heavenly realm that I could not see, where Satan said, "I want her back. She's your child, but I want her destiny. She's a child of God, but I want her testimony. She's a child of God, but I want her ministry." And I had to come to the realization that I understood what's going on is bigger than my broken heart. What's going on is bigger than I can see right now. The enemy is trying to get me, but he's trying to get my worship. And from that, I came up like, come on now, you're not getting me. You know what I'm saying? Once the light bulb went on, I was like, I may be down, but I'm not out. And he is not getting my worship of Jesus. He's not getting my worship of Jesus. And here's what happened to Job. Now it happened on the day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, that a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans attacked and took them. And they also slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them and slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And at that point, I'd be like, no more visitors. But his life possessions are gone. Some of us have lived through recessions and things where you watched your 401k disappear. This is his 401k, this is his home, this is his business, this is everything in one fell swoop. One fell swoop. While he was still speaking, and I'm telling you, like, as a new mom, I can barely read this because my greatest fear is losing my child. And so for anyone in this room, I mean, it's like, this is holy ground, okay? Your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they died, and I alone have escaped to tell you. I mean, there are no words, right? Right? Then Job arose and tore his robe. So what that means in biblical times is he grieved. He didn't pretend. Tearing of the robes is grief. It is the sign of like deep grief. He shaved his head, so he went into mourning, and he fell to the ground, and he worshiped. Now, I want us to look at all of those things. He didn't pretend. He didn't give the good Sunday school answer, like this is okay. He didn't do any of those. He grieved. He went into mourning, but he worshiped and said, naked I came from the womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Verse 22. Through all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. I want you to try to just close your eyes and just understand and try to imagine this. We live in a physical world that we can see, but there is a spiritual world around us we cannot see, where a battle rages over the souls of men, where we have a real enemy who comes to seek to kill, steal, and destroy. And I don't understand how events happen and what happens and who is in. I don't understand all of that. But what I do know in this cosmic battle that's taking place, the war is over worship. The war is over worship. Since before time began, Satan wanted worship for himself, and so he led a cosmic rebellion and took the angels with him, and which we call demons on this earth, and he caused this war in heaven, and it continues today. So behind every tragedy, calamity, flood, everything, there is an enemy who is rejoicing, who is causing, but most of all, he wants people to turn from worshiping the living God and curse him and say, you're not worth it. You're not worth it. And when we can understand the things that we walk through, the things that we're going through, that is the agenda of the enemy. Here's what it will help us to do. It will help us say, I'm not getting stuck here. My eyes cannot see how you're going to provide. My eyes can't see. I don't understand. I remember on the other side of my wilderness, one of the chief things that I learned was God does not have to tell me why for God to be good. God does not have to tell us why for God to be good. But we will all come to that point where we're either going to keep walking with Jesus or we're going to walk away. A book I read during this time was called Hind's Feet on High Places. Has anyone read that book? It's an old classic. Hind's Feet on High Places, and it's an allegory. And this allegory is about this girl named Much Afraid. That's her name before God ultimately changes her name. Her name is Much Afraid, and she is on this journey following the shepherd, and the shepherd is symbolic of Jesus. And along this journey, she goes through things that are just terrifying, and she's also harassed by these enemies and all of these times. And there comes this point on this journey where she is just ready to quit. She's ready to quit this thing called called faith, and she's ready to go back to her little village and hide in her little house and forget this whole thing of following the shepherd. And here's her testimony. Here's what she said. She said, "For one black, awful moment, much afraid considered the possibility of following her shepherd no longer, of turning back. She need not go on. There was absolutely no compulsions about it. She had been following this strange path with her two companions, sorrow and suffering, as guides simply because it was the shepherd's choice for her. It was not the way which she naturally wanted to go. Now she could make her choice. Her sorrow and suffering could be ended at once, and she could plan her life in the way she liked best without the shepherd. During that awful moment or two, it seemed to Much Afraid that she was actually looking into an abyss of horror, into an existence in which there was no shepherd to follow or to trust or to love. No shepherd at all. Nothing but her own horrible self. Ever after, it seemed that she had looked straight down into hell." Jesus looked at Peter and said, "Do you want to go too?" Following Jesus is never a compulsion. He is better. He is good. He is faithful. He is life. But there will be moments that the enemy will tempt us to believe that when we can't see those things, that is not true. I'll never forget, I was standing at, I'm always a front row worship girl. I have trained my husband to be a front row worship person with me. I think it's because of my ADD. I don't get distracted by people. And so even in my wilderness season, I'm on staff at this mega church in Houston, and I have my front row spot, and worship for me was so tender at that time because the music would begin to play and I would begin to bawl my eyes out. And I am a very expressive person. And so from day one of being born again, I worshiped like this, like a crazy woman. If they allowed me a tambourine, I would have had a tambourine. I'm just a crazy, worshiper. But when you're in pain, I just don't sing words rote. I don't just, I mean them from here, And so it's either there or it's nothing. And I remember in the height of my pain and the height of just that, the enemy saying, God has betrayed you, God has left you, God doesn't love you, God forgot you, all of the lies. How much do you love him now? I remember being on the front row of this worship service, and the band begins to play, and my friend Brian began to sing, "Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord when I walk through the desert place." And there was this moment where I felt like I have a choice to worship here or not. And I could not see the blessings. I could not feel the blessings. I could not know that anything that the enemy was saying was not true. But I remember just lifting my arms and saying it despite how I felt. And I said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." And I felt this power break in the spiritual realm. And the more I began to sing it and praise it and proclaim it and worship him, the more my soul experienced the presence and the peace of God. Because I was choosing not to let the enemy have my worship. I was choosing to say, you're not stealing my relationship with the Lord. And so over the next 5 weeks, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at some specific types of wildernesses we go through. Rejection. We're going to look at rejection. It's easy to have walked through something where rejection stings and stays stuck there. You may be functioning in every other part of your life, but it's easy to stay stuck there. We're going to look at specifically the spiritual warfare that happens to us in a wilderness. And then towards the end of our Bible study, we're going to get some practical skills, because you may be going through a really tough one, but there may be just days that you go through something, and it's just a short thing that we're going to look at some more practical stuff towards the end of our study. But right now, y'all are about to break into groups. So I want to pray over us because I know right now in this room, there are some of you who are literally walking through this right now. And the Bible talks about the shield of faith. Well, here's what's interesting. That shield came together with other people. The Roman soldiers had to lift up their shield with someone else's because one person's shield was not enough to prevent the attack of the enemy. It only worked when other people were using their shields together. And so right now, some of you are literally in the attack. Your faith is in the fire. And so you need the covering of other believers with you to love you and to encourage you and to hear your story and to help speak truth into your darkness.